Miniature Wife opens with a striking glimpse of the future. Lindy, now reduced to a tiny, doll-sized version of herself, struggles to survive inside a carefully constructed miniature home. As she attempts to escape, she loses her grip and falls, immediately establishing the bizarre and unsettling situation at the center of the story. From here, the episode rewinds 2 weeks to show how everything led to this moment. Lindy and her husband Les are celebrating their anniversary, trying to repair a marriage that has clearly been strained for years. Once deeply in love, their relationship has gradually eroded under the weight of ambition, resentment, and unmet expectations. Both are attempting a reset. Lindy proposes renewing their vows during a getaway in Vermont, hoping to rediscover what they once had. Les, meanwhile, promises a different kind of fresh start. He has listed their house temporarily so he can focus entirely on his career, with the goal of eventually returning to their beloved gray house once he succeeds. Les is on the brink of a breakthrough. He presents his latest invention, a machine capable of shrinking organic matter, to a potential investor, Hilton. The demonstration impresses, but not enough to secure immediate backing. Les's desperation to prove himself pushes him further, even as those around him worry about his judgment. At the same time, Lindy is dealing with her own crisis. She has been secretly involved with Richard, one of Les's colleagues, but decides to end the affair in an attempt to recommit to her marriage. However, the situation spirals when Richard submits a short story, one that actually belongs to Lindy's student, to a major publication under Lindy's name. Panicked at the possibility of being exposed as a fraud, Lindy tries to contain the damage. She urges her student Jackie to quickly expand the story into a novel, hoping to retroactively legitimize the situation before it becomes public. The tension between Lindy and Les continues to build as both of their personal and professional lives begin to unravel. That evening, they host a crucial event at their home to impress Hilton. Les needs the investment, but the night quickly becomes chaotic. Lindy, already drinking and emotionally volatile, ends up speaking candidly and harshly about Les to a man she doesn't realize is Hilton himself. Surprisingly, her honesty works in Les's favor. Hilton agrees to invest, though with a major condition: his own scientist Vivienne will oversee the lab. While this should be a victory, it only deepens the divide between the couple. Les becomes consumed with the opportunity, immediately prioritizing his work over their plans to renew their vows. He postpones the trip without truly consulting Lindy, assuming she will understand. Instead, this becomes the breaking point. Feeling dismissed and unimportant once again, Lindy decides she's had enough. She reaches out to Richard and plans to leave. Lindy warns Starla, Les's condescending secretary, to kick everyone out and end the party. She also gives the journalist one hell of an interview. At the lab, Les is hurt when Vivienne, Hilton's spy and chief scientist, informs him that his partner, Martin, has already signed the deal with Hilton. As such, she will be at the lab full-time starting the next day. After Vivienne leaves, Les packs his latest invention and heads home. He finds Lindy all packed and ready to leave. They get into an argument as Les puts the lab stuff in the freezer. As they argue about the interview she gave Nils, the conversation turns to their marriage and careers. They tear into each other with no mercy. Les accidentally turns on the miniaturizing truck, and Lindy absent-mindedly picks it up as she mocks him. In a fit of anger, Les presses the button, and the truck sprays a liquid on Lindy. He starts to apologize just as Lindy is miniaturized. She passes out for a few minutes, and when she comes to, he is relieved. However, she is shocked by what is happening and starts to run away. She accidentally hits the chair leg and passes out again. Next morning, Lindy wakes up inside the dollhouse, initially disoriented. Surrounded by post-it notes from Les urging her not to panic, she tries to act normal, moving through the tiny space, until reality crashes in when Les opens the dollhouse and appears as a towering giant. The truth settles: she has been miniaturized. Les attempts to explain, still visibly fascinated by his invention, even in this moment. He insists it was an accident, and promises he can reverse it soon. A few days, 2 at most, but admits he hasn't actually figured out how yet. To him, the dollhouse is a safe, controlled environment. To Lindy, it feels like a prison. The house is a perfect replica of their own, complete with miniaturized clothes and essentials, but that attention to detail only makes the situation more disturbing. Overwhelmed, Lindy lashes out in anger before breaking down completely. Before leaving for work, Les tries to comfort her, even taking her on a toy train ride and ensuring she has food and medicine, though even something as simple as a tablet becomes absurdly difficult at her size. His gestures are caring on the surface, but they highlight the imbalance between them. He still controls everything, including when she's allowed freedom. He locks the dollhouse, claiming it's for her safety. At the lab, the pressure is mounting. Martin reminds Les that they are now bound by a strict 30-day deal with investor Hilton. If they fail to deliver results, they risk losing everything, including their company. Vivienne, Hilton's appointed overseer, tightens control further, inserting herself into every decision. Les's attempt at reversing the shrinking process fails disastrously when a test object briefly returns to size before exploding. With only 29 days left, panic begins to set in. Meanwhile, Lindy is left alone to adapt. Time passes slowly, and isolation begins to take its toll. She talks to a toy for company and explores the dollhouse, only to discover that every exit is sealed. The realization that Les has deliberately confined her deepens her anger. Outside, Richard grows increasingly worried when Lindy doesn't show up to meet him, repeatedly trying to contact her while Les lies about her whereabouts. As the day drags on, Lindy's situation becomes more dangerous. A simple housefly enters through the window, but at her scale, it becomes a terrifying predator. Forced to think quickly, she fights to escape, smashing part of the dollhouse to get away. In the chaos, she ends up clinging to an electrical wire, barely holding on. Next, we see a flashback to over 2 decades earlier reveals a very different dynamic. Lindy working on her novel while Les supports her completely, even isolating her at her own request so she can focus. It's a stark contrast to the present, where control has taken on a far more troubling meaning. Back in the present, Lindy remains confined to the dollhouse. Les calls to reassure her that he's fixed the damage from her earlier escape attempt and insists she's safest staying inside. He claims he's close to solving the restoration problem, but his shifting deadlines make it clear he's not being fully honest. Left alone again, Lindy distracts herself by exploring the miniature space, trying on her tiny clothes, but her thoughts keep drifting back to the past, especially the night she won her Pulitzer, when Les promised to follow her dreams for a few years before focusing on his own. That promise now feels broken. At the lab, the pressure intensifies. Vivienne tightens her authority, enforcing strict oversight and even limiting Les's access within his own lab. Their latest experiment shows slight progress, but still ends in failure, with the test object briefly restored before exploding. With time running out, Les grows increasingly desperate. Meanwhile, Lindy begins to push back. During a call, she realizes Les has been watching her inside the dollhouse, confirming her suspicions about how little privacy she has. Determined to regain some control, she seizes an opportunity when Les returns home and secretly sneaks into his briefcase, making her way to the lab. There, Lindy witnesses the experiments firsthand and finally understands the full extent of the danger. She is essentially a human version of the unstable test objects. She confronts Les, forcing him to admit the truth. Restoring her may take months or even years. The confession breaks whatever trust remained between them. Lindy demands more autonomy, negotiating for basic freedoms instead of being locked away and monitored. Outside of this conflict, other tensions grow. Richard arrives at the house looking for Lindy, but is turned away by Lulu, who unknowingly reveals her resentment toward her mother. Hidden nearby, Lindy overhears her daughter's harsh words, adding another layer to her emotional isolation. At the same time, Les continues to lie to protect the situation, keeping everyone, including Lulu, in the dark. Back at the lab, Lindy uses Les's phone to take control where she can. She contacts her agent to deal with the plagiarism scandal and secretly calls Richard, revealing that she has been miniaturized. Though stunned, he can't react openly, leaving the situation hanging. Les returns Lindy home, apologizing but still unable to offer real solutions. They agree to keep the truth from Lulu, but the damage between them is undeniable. Lindy is no longer willing to simply wait for Les to fix things. She is actively reclaiming control. Next, we see a major shift. The next morning, Lindy is no longer alone. Richard appears at her doorstep, now miniaturized himself. Lindy is no longer alone. Richard, now miniaturized himself, becomes both her ally and complication. Les and Lindy briefly discussing how or if they should tell Lulu the truth about what's happened. The conversation goes nowhere, reinforcing how disconnected they've become. Les leaves for the lab, once again prioritizing work over resolution. With him gone, Richard fully embraces his new reality. He reveals he has built makeshift tools for survival, including a staircase made of Lego and even a tiny motorbike. More than that, he recreates a romantic version of Lindy's past, setting up a miniature date inside a Christmas village to prove his devotion. For a moment, Lindy is drawn in, but the illusion quickly fades when she realizes something important. Richard has no real plan. He didn't shrink himself to save her. He did it to be with her. Meanwhile, the outside world continues to close in. Lulu, back home, tries to reconnect with her old life, but struggles under the shadow of her mother's reputation. At a social outing, she lashes out when people compare her to Lindy, exposing how deeply the tension within the family has affected her. At the lab, Les faces growing pressure. Hilton's presence disrupts progress, while Vivienne becomes increasingly involved, not just professionally, but personally. She begins to connect with Les, even comforting him as he opens up about his failing marriage. However, a new concern emerges when Les notices that his miniaturized cat, Mr. Magoo, is showing signs of instability, raising fears about what could happen to Lindy if he doesn't fix the process soon. Back in the dollhouse, Lindy's frustration reaches a breaking point. When she presses Richard about escaping, his lack of urgency makes it clear he's not thinking beyond their shared existence at this scale. Angry and disillusioned, she leaves him behind and ventures out alone. Once again, the environment proves dangerous. A simple housefly becomes a life-threatening predator. This time, however, Lindy fights back and kills it, marking a turning point in her survival instincts. Richard eventually returns with Lindy's phone, giving her a renewed connection to the outside world. Together, they leave the dollhouse on the tiny motorbike, stepping into a broader, unpredictable space within the house. It's the first real moment of freedom Lindy has had since being shrunk. Meanwhile, Les returns home only to find Lindy missing. Panic sets in immediately. Instead of her, he finds a chilling sign, his own note, "Don't freak out," left behind next to the dead fly. Lindy and Richard hides inside the Christmas village. For the first time since being shrunk, Lindy reconnects with the outside world through her phone, and what she sees changes everything. Notifications flood in, praising her recently published story, which is gaining massive attention and acclaim. Caught up in the moment, Lindy feels a rush of validation she hasn't experienced in years. She quickly calls Terry, who warns her to stay quiet while the plagiarism situation is handled behind the scenes. But Lindy, fueled by renewed confidence and encouraged by Richard, ignores the caution and agrees to a high-profile interview. When her phone dies, even that doesn't stop her. She uses her smaller size to her advantage, climbing kitchen cabinets to retrieve a charger, showing how much she has adapted physically to this new world. Later, she gives an interview via Zoom to a news channel about her short story and upcoming novel. Meanwhile, Les faces mounting pressure at the lab. His suspicions about Hilton deepen, especially after learning hints of questionable business dealings tied to the investment. At the same time, his personal life continues to unravel. His mother arrives unexpectedly, forcing him to maintain the lie about Lindy's absence, while Lulu returns home and reveals she has dropped out of college, another sign that everything around him is falling apart. Back at home, Lindy makes a decisive emotional break. She tells Les she wants out of the marriage and plans to leave with Richard. But instead of clarity, the situation spirals further into chaos. When Les returns and discovers Lindy has been with Richard, his reaction is explosive. In a fit of rage, he captures Richard, covering him in honey and birdseed and throwing him into a cage with a bird, turning his anger into something dangerously cruel. The conflict escalates beyond repair. Les cuts power to the dollhouse, trying to reassert control, but Lindy refuses to be contained anymore. She escapes, once again, only to discover that her personal scandal has now exploded publicly. Lulu has posted a viral video exposing her plagiarism, and the internet quickly turns against Lindy. Elsewhere, we see a New Year's Eve event where Les is forced to present his work to Hilton, despite the fact that the regrowth formula is still unstable. With the deadline looming, Les is under intense pressure and ends up faking progress to maintain investor confidence, buying himself more time while the truth remains far from solved. Elsewhere, Richard survives the bird attack, but the experience changes him. When he reunites with Lindy, he confronts her harshly, realizing she used him more as a weapon against Les than as a partner. He reveals the truth about the 30-day deadline imposed by Hilton, making Lindy fully understand just how dire the situation is. Les returns home to find Lindy gone again, overwhelmed by guilt and losing control of everything he once managed. Inside the house, Lindy embraces her new reality in a darker way, declaring she's done waiting to be saved, and instead will make Les suffer for what he's done. As flames begin to consume parts of the dollhouse, the power dynamic finally flips completely. Now completely outside his control, Lindy uses her size and her access to technology to her advantage. Through her phone, she hacks into the house's speaker and lighting systems, constantly watching and taunting Les. What started as survival has now become retaliation. She threatens to expose everything if he tries to leave or regain control, trapping him in his own home the way he once trapped her. At the lab, the pressure escalates further. Martin informs Les that Hilton has moved up an investor showcase, giving him even less time to stabilize the formula. Already exhausted and mentally spiraling, Les struggles to focus. Vivian steps in, offering support, and their dynamic grows closer as she positions herself as someone who actually understands his work and him. Meanwhile, Lindy's outside life takes another turn. Terry reaches out with unexpected news. Jackie has gone public, but instead of exposing Lindy, she gives her credit, softening the scandal. However, the damage shifts elsewhere. Lulu, who previously exposed her mother, is now facing intense online backlash. This leads to one of the episode's most important moments. Lindy calls Lulu, and for the first time, the truth comes out. Lulu learns her mother has been miniaturized, and the two finally confront years of misunderstanding. Lindy explains herself honestly, and Lulu begins to see her differently, not as the distant, selfish figure she believed, but as someone flawed and hurt. The emotional distance between them starts to close. When Les returns home, he walks into a completely changed situation. Instead of controlling the narrative, he is confronted by both Lindy and Lulu. Lulu now sides with her mother, openly blaming Les for what's happened. This is a major shift. Les is no longer the authority figure in the house. Unable to handle the loss of control and emotional rejection, Les lashes out. In a moment that shows how far he's fallen, he threatens Lindy directly, going as far as attempting to flush her away. But Lindy, now fully adapted and far more capable, escapes once again. At the lab, Martin uncovers a disturbing truth. Hilton is planning to sell the miniaturization technology to the military, intending to use it on weapons rather than agriculture. Realizing everything they built could be weaponized, Martin urgently tries to warn Les before it's too late. But Les is already spiraling. Instead of focusing on the bigger threat, he isolates himself at home, barricading himself in a flooded bedroom while obsessively working on the restoration formula. His goal is no longer just to fix Lindy, it's to prove himself. Meanwhile, Lindy is done playing passive. Determined to stop him, she actively sabotages his efforts. She sneaks through the house and even physically attacks him, stabbing his eye and luring him into traps, including scattering marbles that send him crashing to the floor. Their relationship has now fully transformed into a battle, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Richard, caught in between, tries to reason with Lindy. He urges her to stop escalating things, but she refuses. For Lindy, this is no longer about survival. It's about making Les face consequences. She believes he doesn't deserve to succeed after everything he's done. Outside the house, Lulu faces her own turning point. Struggling with her future, she reaches out to Lindy for guidance. In one of the season's quieter moments, Lindy gives her honest advice, encouraging her to follow what she actually wants instead of what's expected. It's a rare moment of clarity and connection between them, showing that despite everything, Lindy is still trying to be a better mother. Back at the lab, the pressure builds toward a breakthrough. During another attempt, Les realizes a crucial mistake in his calculations. The formula needs to be inverted. This insight finally stabilizes the growth process, bringing him closer than ever to reversing the miniaturization. But instead of using this breakthrough to fix things, Les makes a darker choice. When he returns home, he reveals his progress to Lindy, only to unleash an enlarged Mr. Magoo on her, effectively leaving her survival up to chance. It's a chilling moment that shows how far he's fallen, prioritizing ego and control over her safety. At the same time, his professional life collapses. His growing arrogance and obsession push Vivienne away, and he ultimately loses his position at the lab. Stripped of his authority and recognition, Les is forced to confront the truth. His need for a Nobel Prize has been driving everything, even at the cost of his family. Next, we see a flashback over 20 years earlier, when Lindy's book is finally approved for publication. At this point, she and Les are deeply in love, but not entirely aligned. Lindy is hesitant about marriage, unsure if she even wants a traditional life, while Les is far more certain. Despite her doubts, they impulsively decide to get married, setting the stage for a wedding that quickly spirals out of control. What was meant to be a small, unconventional ceremony soon grows into a large, chaotic event, largely driven by family expectations. Lindy becomes increasingly anxious, especially about her mother, Diane, whose presence immediately brings tension. At the same time, Les is dealing with his own pressures, including doubts about his career after potential investors back out of his plans. The rehearsal dinner becomes the breaking point. Delays, alcohol, and unresolved family issues turn the evening into a disaster. Diane, already hostile, becomes increasingly erratic as she drinks, eventually reading aloud from Lindy's book and accusing her of exposing personal family matters. The situation escalates into complete chaos. Arguments turn physical, and in a shocking moment, Diane lashes out violently, injuring both Les and Lindy's father during the confrontation. The evening that was supposed to celebrate their future instead exposes exactly how unstable their families, and by extension their relationship, really are. Later that night, things get even more complicated. In a vulnerable moment, Les overhears Lindy admitting that part of her reason for getting married was to be part of his normal family. The comment devastates him, reinforcing a fear that he is not truly enough for her. He leaves, emotionally shaken, while Lindy is left to confront her own confusion about what she really wants. Separate conversations shape their decisions moving forward. Lindy speaks with her father, who encourages her to rely only on herself, planting the idea that independence matters more than commitment. Meanwhile, Diane finds Les alone and surprisingly comforts him, explaining that Lindy's behavior comes from fear. She pushes people away because she's afraid they'll leave her first. By the next day, everything changes. Instead of going through with the chaotic wedding, Lindy and Les choose to run away together. Away from their families and expectations, they finally speak honestly. Les admits he has always wanted marriage and stability, while Lindy admits she never saw herself that way, but still loves him deeply. In a quiet, intimate moment, they choose each other, not because of pressure, but despite it. They get married privately on their own terms, believing that love alone will be enough to sustain them. In present, Lindy takes control of her immediate survival. After everything that has happened, she finally manages to turn the tables, saving Richard and trapping Mr. Magoo inside a birdcage, removing one of the biggest threats in her miniature world. For the first time, she is not running. She is actively managing the situation. Les, meanwhile, returns home completely defeated. He reveals that he has been pushed out of his own lab by Hilton, losing control of the very project he created. Worse, Hilton is now moving forward with plans to sell the miniaturization technology for military use. With everything slipping away, Les admits the only way to stop it is to break back into the lab, retrieve the completed growth formula, and erase all the data before it can be weaponized. This shifts the story into a final mission. Lindy, still tiny, becomes the only one capable of carrying it out without being detected. Despite everything between them, the betrayal, the control, the cruelty, they are forced to work together again. At the same time, Lulu returns after making a major decision about her future. Unlike earlier episodes where she was caught in anger and confusion, she now begins to see both her parents more clearly. Her role becomes crucial, not just emotionally, but practically, as she helps coordinate what needs to be done. Inside the lab, the stakes are at their highest. Security is tighter, time is limited, and failure would mean losing the formula forever. Lindy navigates the space at her scale, retrieving what Les needs while avoiding detection. The mission reflects everything she has become: resourceful, independent, and no longer someone waiting to be saved. Les, on the outside, finally shifts as well. For the first time, his focus is not on recognition, success, or the Nobel Prize. It is on Lindy. He lets go of the ambition that drove him throughout the season and instead works toward fixing the damage he caused. As the plan unfolds, the tension comes from uncertainty. The formula is still unstable, and there is no guarantee it will work. The possibility of failure, of Lindy remaining this way permanently or something going wrong entirely, hangs over everything. In the final stretch, Les makes a decisive move, choosing Lindy over his work, and destroying what remains of the project to keep it out of Hilton's hands. It's the clearest rejection of the obsession that defined him. The series closes with the restoration attempt. It's risky, incomplete, and far from certain, but it works. Lindy returns to her normal size, bringing the central conflict to an end. In the aftermath, the tone shifts. The lab is gone. The ambition that once consumed Les is stripped away, and the marriage is left exposed without distraction. Lindy, now back to herself, begins to write again, this time drawing from everything that happened, turning it into a new story.